So welcome to our third annual panel on the state of global recruitment process outsourcing. My name is Lamis Abu Rama. I'm with the RPOA, and I will be your host and moderator for this panel. The first time we hosted this webinar was back in 2020 during the pandemic. The industry was going through a turbulent time, as we all know. The panel was a collaboration with our new partners back then at Everest Group. Since the pandemic, we went through a complete freeze of hiring to pent-up demands and spike of hiring to the great resignation and changes in candidate behavior. This year, we started with a looming recession and whether we will have a hard landing or is it a soft landing? Many of you are seeing the impact of these changes on the RPO industry firsthand from your seat in talent acquisition. The team at Everest Group analyzes the collective data and reports on the trends and themes that they see in the industry. I'm honored to be joined by two practice directors at Everest Group who will share their latest data on the RPO market. And now I do want to ask for their self-introduction. So Salesh, let's do that one more time. 60 seconds, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone, Sailesh here, dialing in from New Delhi today. I'm a practice director here at Everest Group, been with the firm for more than 3 years now. And throughout my time here, I've been tracking the talent acquisition space very closely with a special focus on RPO and permanent talent acquisition services and technologies. So yeah, excited to be talking to everyone today, and over to you, Lokesh.
Awesome, thank you. And Lokesh, welcome.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lamis. Hey, hi everyone. It's really nice to be here today. So I'm Lokesh Goyal. I'm also a practice director with Everest Group. So I'm based out of New Delhi in India. So I'm working across our talent acquisition as well as HR outsourcing practices, taking care of research in multiple areas within these two clusters. So, permanent recruitment being one of them. Under that, I specialize in the RPO side of things, as well as, certain areas on the HRO front, rewards and recognition, employee experience, and so on. And it's really nice to be here today and looking forward to this session and interacting with all the other panelists as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we also have two RPOA members. I asked them to join us to share their perspective. I want to start with Joe Marino. Please, 60 seconds, introduce yourself.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon as well. I know we have a global audience. It's a pleasure to be here with Salesh, Lakesh, Kim, and Lamis. My background has been within the recruiting space since 2001, so a little over 22 years, been about with Human People Solutions, which is a RPO provider for the last 14 of those years. And I was just thinking about how many hires I've been a part of in my career. Kim probably has a similar experience. It's hundreds of thousands. And the thing that gets me excited every day is bringing together groups like this to be able to talk about our industry. Looking at the panelists that are joining, those friends, colleagues for many years, and new friends and probably new colleagues that will come out of this discussion today. Excited to be here. Thank you, Lamis.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Kim, I'm going to ask you an impossible challenge here. 60 seconds to tell us about yourself.
It may be difficult, certainly, Lamis. Good morning, everyone. Kim Davis. I'm a recognized RPO pioneer. You can kind of see that from my gray hair. I'm the old guy on the panel. I am also a thought leader and subject matter expert on talent acquisition and recruitment. I've started, led, and sold 2 highly recognized RPO firms. I also helped start 2 of the major global RPO providers that exist today. All of my businesses have been highly recognized. They've been on the HRO Today, RPO, Enterprise Baker Dozen list, HRO Today's Total Talent Management Baker Dozen list, the Everest Group, RPO Peak Matrix, both as a both as a shining star and major contender. All of these I'm very proud of. Today I act as an RPOA consultant. I'm a senior advisor to FutureSolve, an HR consulting firm. I'm also an operating partner for a large private private equity firm, helping them focus on staffing and more specifically RPO. And lastly, I'm an independent consultant, helping staffing and RPO firms grow, expand
Thank you, Kim.
service offerings, and last but not least, better position themselves for M&A activities. Thank you, Lemise.
Wonderful. Thank you. We love having you, Kim. I also want to mention that we were expecting Rob Neverett to be on the panel. He had a last-minute conflict. He is not able to join us, but I do want to give him a shout out because last year he was on the panel calling from Cancun while he was on vacation. So the fact that he was not able to join us is due to conditions out of his control. I do want to explain also the format of today's discussion. We will be covering 4 topics. The 4 topics will be market overview and outlook, buyer consideration, emerging themes for the future, and lastly, we'll close with food for thoughts and concluding remarks. Each section, before we start the section, we are going to ask you, the audience, to your expectations. So we're going to start with a poll. And with that first topic, I'm going to ask the audience the following. So you should see the poll on your screen. 2 questions. How did your recruiting or hiring change this year compared to last year? And the second question is, how is your outlook for 2020 today compared to the beginning of the year? Let's look at the results, and if you see on the screen, the 4 participants, and all participants answered. 73% are seeing decrease in their business today compared to last year. Only 12% are seeing increase, and 15% it's the same. In terms of the outlook, it's also looking a little gloomy here. 45% are less optimistic. So I'm going to stop screening and then ask our Everest team to share what they're seeing from their end in terms of the RPO market data.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Lemise. So let's just give a quick snapshot of our research in this particular area, so that the audience has an idea about what they're looking at in terms of the data that we present today. So we analyze, more than 45 providers across the broader RPO engagements. We analyze multiple data points in terms of what kind of performance they are doing. We do that through a process which is a part of the Peak Metrics assessment. So Peak Metrics is one of the flagship reports that we publish every year. It basically includes a 2-axis graph where we position all the service providers based on 2 key matrices, which is vision and capability and their market impact. So as part of that exercise, we receive a lot of data around the market. That, coupled with our regular interactions with most of the buyer landscape over the year, that helps us in generate some deep data analytics on this particular piece, and that's where we are able to share the market overview with you today. So I'll just quickly jump onto that. Yeah, so let's talk about the global RPO market first, right? So everyone here would be aware that post-COVID, we saw a sharp increase when it came to traction for the RPO business. While that helped, in RPO gaining popularity as a business construct, especially for the talent needs of enterprises, but the same kind of growth could not be sustained in the next year, right? So we saw a dip in terms of the growth, which was towards a more realistic number. So we saw, the RPO market growing by around 14% in 2022 over the past year, to reach a mark of $6 billion, which is in itself a huge number for an outsourcing construct. However, right, so now we are talking about 2023, and I'm now going to talk about what Lemise has been mentioning about the impending, recession and the loom around it. So there has been definitely an impact on the overall, traction in the market that we see. Most of the service providers as well as the buyers, they are now acting more, as we call it, cautiously optimistic. So they are being more, particular about what kind of deals they are entering into, right? So the key takeaway from here is that the talent demand gap still exists, but there is a delay in decision making. And that is definitely going to impact the performance of the market in 2023. So we are anticipating a muted growth for this year, which would be a single digit for the global RPO market, around 0 to 3%. However, we still remain positive for the mid to long term outlook for this market, right? So if you talk about a 5-year growth, we expect that, once the recovery from this recession starts kicking in, the market is going to make up for all the shortfall during this year and some part of the next year. And by 2027, it's going to achieve a CAGR of approximately 13 to 15%. So yeah, and talking about recession, now that we have talked about global landscape, let's go one level down into the geographic nuances. So one of the significantly impacted markets that we are seeing right now is the entire Eurozone. The recession is there. It has been acknowledged by many of the key geographies in the region. However, the same thing is not getting acknowledged as of now in North American market. So, that is one thing that we still foresee that is going to be there for the rest part of the year and into some part of 2024 as well. So what we are saying is that the North American RPO market is going to, enter, or is going to stay almost flat or even, degrow a little bit by around -2 to -2.5%. This is majorly, attributed to the impact of recession as well as the slow decision making on the part of buyers. However, towards the second half of 2024, we think that the market is going to start recovering, and we are going to see a lot of more traction coming into the RPO markets. We are also going to talk about what are the key strategic areas which are going to be the growth drivers for the market down the flow of this presentation today. Talking about the buyers, right? So which are the top buyer segments that continue to gain significant traction or generate significant demand for RPO constructs? So manufacturing and high tech and telecom have definitely been the forerunners on that front. This time, what is new is that we also see a lot of traction from the pharma and the life sciences industry. So what we saw in a considerable change after post COVID, we saw that a lot of these enterprises, which traditionally relied on internal talent acquisition teams, they started adopting outsourcing as a business construct, because that model was sort of proven during the firefighting that was happening during COVID, right? So everyone was looking out for talent, and within a very short period of time, and that had sort of given the RPO business construct a headway into this industry segment as well. And now what we're seeing is that in 2022, this has been one of the major growth drivers for the RPO business. So yeah, and then let's talk about the strategic priorities. So we have talked about which are the industries and how the market is looking. Now let's talk about what are the major priorities for the buyers when it comes to evaluating an RPO program. Employer branding is one of the major areas where they are focusing. They want to attract a lot of talent, and employer branding and all the services that the RPO programs are able to offer into that particular construct, that is definitely gaining a lot of popularity. Second key theme that we are seeing is basically the reliance on the talent acquisition tech tools as well as automation. So a lot of dependence on dependence as well as investments from the service provider side on new gen technologies like AI and ML is something that we are seeing a lot in the market now. Then third, and one of the key themes that we are seeing is consulting and advisory. So bespoke consulting engagements, which is something which the enterprises used to go to traditional consulting firms for. Now they are more and more approaching RPO providers with those capabilities to do that. And the reason behind that is simple. So most of the large RPOs, they are sitting on a mine of data, and the kind of insights that they are able to generate, which are relevant to the talent acquisition programs, that is something which the buyers are really appreciating. Yeah, over to you, Lamees.
Thank you, Lukesh. And before we move to the next topic, I do want to ask Joe maybe first, what resonated with you from the data that Everest just shared?
Sure, yeah, and I'll thank you, Lamees. I'll even go back to the poll. I sort of would have expected the results. So the year-over-year expectations compared from 22 to 23 in the first half of this year to now, I think it was 73% decline, or the participants at 73% were the businesses were declining, and 45% from the beginning of the year to this year. There it is. Yeah, thank you, Lamees. To me, that's pretty common. I mean, on the human side of things, human people solutions, we grew north of 50% from 2021 to 22, and we'll actually be in the single-digit growth from 22 to 23. So we made a little bit of an anomaly. I think 27% said they expected an increase, or the outlook was an increase from the beginning of this year to the next year. What we're seeing is things are starting to pick up right now. And I think part of that for us, I know actually, is based on the size of our partners, right? We have large partnerships, and we have many recruiters that are deployed. For those organizations that only maybe have one or two recruiters deployed on a partnership, it's pretty easy for those partnerships to maybe go away if openings go down, requisitions go down. For us, if we go from 2,000 openings for a partner down to 1,700, then we still have recruiters on that. But we're also seeing an uptick. The data to me makes sense, right? It makes sense. We're in a lull here, whatever that looks like. Second half of last year to the first half of this year, maybe there's a slight decline for most folks. Maybe there's a little bit more, but my expectations are that improves. And the other thing I'll say is, with respect to sort of buyers, there are still, I talk to a lot of RPO companies every single month, and have, especially over the last 3 months, we're a pretty acquisitive group. So we're out there sort of talking to folks. And there are new partnerships being signed with organizations every single week. So if you're sort of feeling like, wow, it's taking longer to get a new partnership signed up, if it's a little bit smaller than the initial expectations, that's what we're experiencing. But there are still organizations that are being exposed to RPO. And in many cases, if they're downsizing their HR teams, and maybe talent acquisition is a part of that, it could be an opportunity for an RPO company to be able to flex up without having headcount tied to the business. Maybe it's a project to start and then sort of comes down a little bit.
Well, thank you. I think you segued into our next topic with the RPO buyer. And Kim, I'll include you in the next discussions. And I also want to mention to the audience, if you have a question for the panelists during the webinar, put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address them as they come along. Buyer considerations. Let's start with another poll, and let's see what you expect here. So what we want to know is, what do you think is affecting the buyer decisions, and what are the top challenges for buyers this year? And this is what the participants say. The top consideration for buying RPO this year is cost reduction is the top, followed by better insights and analytics. In terms of buyer challenges, you're saying the top challenge looks like price, cost pressure, followed by talent skill shortage. So let's stop sharing that and see what the data tell us.
Yeah, and this kind of resonates very well with the next thing that we want to present over here, right? Let's see what Everest Group is saying on this matter. So Everest Group, just for the background, Everest Group conducts regular surveys with most of the enterprises who are buyers of outsourcing products. And we do undertake a key issue study on a year-to-year basis. So what we are seeing on the screen right now is basically the ranking or the top 5 challenges for the last 2 to 3 years, right? So clearly, what the audience is also seeing today is similar to what Everest Group is also witnessing, right? So price and cost pressure is one of the most important issue that the buyers are facing right now. Second thing is about evolving to customer needs and business models. This is more about process improvement and how their existing processes can be optimized. Then skills shortage, which used to be priority number one back in 2022. Now it has moved down to the third item on the list, right? And the first item has been taken by the pricing pressure. So clearly there is a significant impact of recession that we are seeing in buyer sentiment as well. Then of course, slowdown in demand and slowdown in decision making, they are ranking as 4 and 5. But then the good news is that they are not part of the first three ranks, right? So what it means is that although there has been some slowdown in demand for the core businesses of the buyers, but it's not something which they see as a major challenge. So that is definitely a good news. So if the demand continues to increase, of course, right now there would be some caution from the buyer side as well. But then the good news is that the recovery also will be quicker. So business are continuing to grow. They are continuing to generate demand for their core business activities, and hence they will definitely going to need a lot of talent as well. So that is one thing that we wanted to highlight on this survey as well, and it's good to know that it's resonating with the audience as well. Let's move on to the next insight that we have for you. So on the top, what you see is how we categorize the key buyer segments in terms of their size. So less than 3,000 employees, we qualify them as small businesses. Then 3 to 15,000 employees are the mid businesses, and above 15,000, they are large businesses. So what we see is that in terms of buyer considerations, there are 4 clear, themes that have come out. So process improvement, stakeholder experience, which includes the candidate experience aspect as well. Definitely analytics and insights, as well as cost reduction. So these are the top 4 challenges that all the buyers across these categories are facing. However, when we interacted with buyers, we also asked that what would you like the service providers to work more on? And there we saw certain common themes as well as certain differences in terms of priorities. So one of the key things was that insights and analytics was definitely very important across the board, along with access to technology. So clearly there is a huge focus on tech making significant contribution to the talent acquisition programs for most of the buyers. So most of the service providers also need to realign their investment strategies accordingly. Cost optimization, although it was mentioned by the mid-size buyers, it was not really mentioned as an area for improvement by the small size as well as large size buyers. The third key thing that we can see over here is the value-added services. So value-added services in terms of consulting and advisory support, DE&I, advisory, then employer branding, all those things are definitely some things that buyers are really appreciating and would want to see more of in terms of capability development by service providers.
And the way these value-added services are being defined also varies, right? So for large buyers, when they talk about value-added, they're really talking about advanced analytics. They're talking about a consulting advisory sort of a construct where they want providers to help out with workforce planning, etc. Whereas on the small and mid-sized buyers, they want some of the, I would say, table stakes to be brought into the programs, right? So employer branding, for example, simple workforce planning, recruiter training, right? So recruiter on demand as well. So there is a demand for value-added services, but what's becoming important is to understand the nuances that exist among each of these segments, right? And I think that also will help us, if we go to the next slide, Lokesh, we can, expand a bit on how that is playing out.
Before we get to the next slide, guys, we do have a clarifying question from the audience about your definition of price cost pressure. Is that more around the overall TA cost, or is it specifically price points from RPO vendors?
No, it's around overall talent acquisition costs, right? So obviously, one part of that is the pricing from vendors. So one thing or one trend that we typically see happen in a slowdown like this is buyers want more risk offloading, right? When they engage with vendors, so we see a slight shift happening from hybrid pricing models or fixed fee pricing models to more of variable pricing, where it's more requisition based. So definitely there is a bit of both, right? It's not just the RPO costs that buyers are worried about, but all in all, compensation going across the board, all of the impacts of what happened during the Great Resignation, right? That has created a pretty big ripple effect across the entire ecosystem.
I am looking at time, and we'll probably want to move to the next topic, which I understand is going to take more time. I'm going to skip on the poll question and ask the Everest team to share their data, and then I'll include Kim and Joe with the discussion.
Sure.
Let me just quickly wrap up the next part of the slides that we have today. So here we are talking about the business models that are there under the broader RPO construct, right, or the recruitment constructs. So what you see on the left side are the flexible models, as we call them. So these are more agile and more short-term in nature. So for example, Project RPO is one of the most popular constructs that we see here, along with recruiter on demand or staff augmentation kind of constructs. On the right side, under the green box, what you see are the more end-to-end solutions or longer strategic engagements, which includes things like enterprise RPO, as well as certain advisory and consulting services. So what we are seeing right now is, yes, definitely there was a lot of traction post-COVID amongst the flexible recruitment services, which was basically driven by the speed and agility. So you need a few hundred or few thousand hires within a short span of time. What do? You go for a Project RPO kind of a construct, right? So that was playing a pivotal role over there that helped expand this market a lot. But now what we're seeing is that the long-term buyers, or the buyers who are going to adopt RPO as a key part of their talent acquisition programs, they are looking at more strategic engagements, when it comes to RPO buyers. So they are looking at more long-term engagements and how the RPO buyer can be more of a strategic partner rather than just being a vendor. So that is something that is definitely gaining a lot of traction, and we are going to see more of those kind of deals in the future.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Lokesh, go ahead.
So just let me quickly show some of the data points, around what we are just talking about right now. First, let me just define how we qualify a deal as a Project RPO deal. We basically define that based on the time of engagement. So if it's less than 12-month kind of a deal, that is called a project deal. If it's a more duration, then it becomes sort of an enterprise engagement. So what we see over here is from 2021, where there was a lot of firefighting going on. So there was a larger, almost 1/3 of the active deals in the market at that point of time were project in nature, that is less than 12-month duration. But what we saw in 2022 is that a lot of those deals expired because of the shorter engagement, and the market moved back towards the non-project deals in those formats. However, what is interesting to see here is the perspective from the small and mid-size organizations, right? So on the right side, what you see is that almost 65 to 70% of the deals that originated from small and mid-size buyers, they were project in nature, which is less than 12 months. So what we are seeing here is that when it comes to the first generation buyers, the early adopters of RPO, they try to gauge or test the waters through the project construct, and then if it suits their needs and if it fits into their overall talent acquisition strategy, they convert those deals into longer duration enterprise deals. So this is something that is inherent to the kind of to the small and mid-sized buyer size. So that is something that we are going to continue to see in midterm horizon as well.
Yeah, I mean the project construct or the short-term construct will reduce and stabilize. It won't really disappear. Is what I think we want to see as a takeaway from the biggest.
We have a interesting question from the audience, and we have a smart audience here. Experience. The question is, what we heard seems to be an ongoing trend every year. So, what is new?
So in terms
in terms of which trend?
This is when you are presenting the your data, the previous slide. And maybe the person who asked question, if they want to clarify the question to our panelists, and we'll get back with them as well.
Lumis, I can sort of comment. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Joe, go ahead. Go ahead, I'll jump in now.
No, what jumped out to me that was different was, for a while it's been the number one challenge has been around skill and the supply of skill, right? That was the number one. I think it was called the challenge in 2020 and 22, and now that's 20 in 2023. That's third, and it's an interesting dynamic because I think if you ask like TA leaders, they're going to say, yeah, the supply is still hard to get. It's just what's happening, at least in North America with the economy, is putting pressure from a cost perspective, which is sort of risen above the shortage of talent, but yet the talent shortage is still there. What I would think would happen in the next 12 to 24 months is that you're going to see cost pressure come down a little bit. And then what's going to be the number one factor probably will be around the supply of talent. Our industry within talent acquisition is really interesting right now. Job openings are still near record highs, like over 9 million. Pre-COVID was in the 7 million range. And consumer price index finally is at 3% last month. That's the main outlier as far as supply and demand for talent within talent acquisition. And now if inflation starts to subside a little bit, then I think you're going to see maybe cost comes down a little bit as far as the number one pressure. And then what's going to happen is going to be around supply for skill.
And another thing I think that has really changed, and Kim can also attest if I'm right or wrong, but there has been a massive shift in the thought process of buyers, right? So the analysis that you see here, we are also seeing a massive uptick from in terms of openness, right? So the sort of chaotic talent landscape that has existed over the last 3 to 4 years, it has resulted in awareness that a lot of in-house HR and talent acquisition functions are not really equipped, right, to deal with these variances across the market, which is why small and mid-sized clients, or even healthcare, which was a very closed sector for a very, very long time, they really opened up their doors, right? They're more willing to experiment. And as Joe said earlier, Human had a 50% growth, and we talked to a lot of healthcare buyers who are now trying to play catch up, right, to other industries where banking and financial services or high tech and telecom have been for, let's say, half a decade now, right? So I think that is the biggest change that has happened, and this will also get reflected in some of the emerging themes that we'll be talking about in the next section, right? Because 5 years back, RPO was more transactional, or was thought of as largely an outsourcing program. But I think in 2023, where we are right now, it's being considered as a strategic growth, right?
Kim, any additional point? Or
the only thing I'm going to point out on all the data, there are no surprises. I agree with the analysis. I agree with the research. You look at the projects being way up. That's not just a function of the buyer. It's also a function of the provider. go back to 2022, most providers weren't willing to engage in projects because they didn't have to. Now they have to. So I'm not surprised by any of the data. I do think there's pressure to take on more shared risk with the provider, that they don't want just management fees anymore. They want the provider to take on additional risk to get the job done. So I agree with the analysis.
Excellent. And we have an excellent question from the audience that is a great segue for our next topic. The question, how are RPOs differentiating from what internal HR teams are doing? We do have a poll, so let's run that poll and see what the audience think. And then we'll see what the data tell us as well. How can outsourced recruiting providers differentiate themselves? And the second question, select all the market intelligence services your company currently offers or uses.
Yes, you and Molly are on the same page. Her question was very similar to this.
That's right. All right, let's close the poll. I know it's a long one, but and see what the results here. The first question, how can outsourced recruiting providers differentiate themselves? The majority think they can apply all of the above: market intelligence, technology, and consulting. And with the second question, in terms of the market intelligence services people on the call provide, it's all across the board. So let me stop sharing and see what Everest team will tell us.
Yeah. So I mean, the story is nothing really massively different, right? So we are seeing a huge demand as well as investment. So demand from the buyers and investment from service providers and vendors in these key areas, right? And that's pretty well reflected in the responses we also received from the audience, right? So buyers want more around market intelligence for sure, right? Market intelligence, technology consulting, will deep dive into each of these in the next slide. So Lokesh, if you move to the next one. So what exactly are buyers looking for when it comes to market intelligence? So for a long time, when we talk analytics, right, it was largely around reporting, diagnostic information around the program, right? But the way the market reacted and the talent landscape actually shifted in 2021 with the Great Resignation coming in. Buyers were, all over the place looking for these three key categories. They wanted skill and talent demographic data, like where is the talent that I need? How can I acquire them, right? And I'll add on to that the entire crucial conversation around improving their ESG and D&I metrics across the organization. Buyers wanted much more granular information from their service providers and their vendor partners. Then the second category was financial data, right? How much are candidates receiving in terms of compensation? What are the benefits they're getting? What are some of the wage rate fluctuations happening in various geographies? How, what are some of the inflation trends? How is the cost of living adjustments, the COLA adjustments going to affect what I am paying for, my outsourced programs or my vendors across the board? And the last and the most crucial one was competitive intelligence. It was not just important for in-house teams to do things right. It was important for them to keep up with what competitors across the industry. And this is where, this is one of the key areas where I would say external RPO vendors were able to add on a lot more value as compared to internal HR teams. The biggest pain point we heard was, especially if you look at a lot of, let's say, Fortune 500 firms or even some mid-sized firms who are pretty far along in their processes and their practices. A lot of the firms said that, hey, we have access to the same data, right? We do have these databases, we do have these tools that our RPO partners are using. But where the internal teams struggle is to make sense of that data and create actionable insights out of that. And that's where the external partners and RPO vendors and RPO partners really came through. They were able to take all of that information and synthesize it into, a actionable plan for buyers across the world. And that continues to be a very key area of focus in the coming days as well. Lokesh, if we could go to the next slide. Now come to technology, right? A very key struggle has been, with the entire landscape of HR and talent acquisition SaaS really exploding, right? There's so many point solutions floating across the market, right? It's becoming a tough task and a headache for HR leaders and talent acquisition leaders to keep up with the market, right? And that's where we see a lot of, partnership ecosystems and, partnership ecosystems, as well as some, proprietary technology stacks being invested in by, your vendors and your RPO partners. So if you divide the entire market into 4 key categories: analytics, then talent technology platforms, which are sort of broader platforms, right? Like your applicant tracking systems, your VMSs, your candidate relationship management platforms. So we have technology platforms. Then we have process improvement tools, where robotic process automation, marketing solutions and candidate matching tools come into play. And there are point solutions which do a very focused task. And where buyers are facing challenge is to acquire all of these technologies within their organization and weave them together to work in a perfect harmony, right? Because a lot of the internal HR teams lack the expertise, and that's where external expertise becomes very, very important. So if we go beyond RPO for a second and we look at the broader HR and talent acquisition space, it was, a massive year for consulting firms across the board. And everybody was trying to do, HR transformation, digital transformation, all at the same time. And that's where RPOs really shone through. Buyers are now becoming cognizant to what we would term as the difference of specialists, right? And RPO partners really bring that specialist aspect into the relationship with a very deep understanding of the workforce and talent acquisition in general, right? So how, apart from the table stakes, there are also differentiating capabilities, which, we see very few providers really invest in. Prescriptive and predictive analytics, external market intelligence, internal mobility. All of these are very, emerging trends and emerging terms. And we are seeing a lot more partnerships coming into the forefront, right, within the RPO space and the staffing space. And that's where, all of these RPO or outsourced programs are targeting to add value to buyers at the end of it. Now, the third one was consulting. Lokesh, if we could go there. So, consulting, especially workforce and talent acquisition related consulting really, shone through, and it escalated quite a bit over the last 2 years. These are some of the areas, some of the demand areas that we saw a lot of enterprises asking for. There was a huge push around technology advisory and implementation, specifically workforce related technology or work tech. There was a huge push around diversity, equity, and inclusion, assessment and selection, EVP and brand, locations advisory, workforce channel strategies, right? So the investments that RPO providers were able to make, the capabilities that they had developed over the last 5 years as subject matter experts, that really helped them cater to this demand, right? We saw a lot of generalist firms out there coming to RPO providers, asking them to partner on broader transformation projects for, large scale implementations and, large scale programs. And that's where RPO providers have actually, created a niche in the market. Let's go to the next slide to sort of, so this is the data that we are seeing that happen. So if you look at, RPO deals with a small component of consulting within, we saw that number grow from 720 odd in 2021 to 800 plus in 2022, right? So at this point, a lot of RPO deals, I think at least 25% of RPO deals actually have some sort of a strategic component being added, right? It's not just sourcing, screening, and scheduling and onboarding anymore, but now there is a DEI sourcing component being added. There is a workforce planning component being added. There is an advanced analytics component being added. A lot of buyers are asking for prevalent services, as we have listed here. And then there are a lot of emerging services like strategic workforce planning, future of work consulting, location strategy that buyers are increasingly asking for across the board. So yeah, I'll take a quick pause here and Joe, Kim, if you want to weigh in.
This is Kim. I mean, I see, again, I agree with your data points. Some of this that you called consulting services has been around for a long time, especially with the larger providers. I think for some of the smaller mid-sized providers, some of this is new. When you go back to your technology, the big change that I see now is greater pressure on a technology stack and have it integrated that can sit on top of the client's ATS. I see that happening more and more. And that if you look at the smaller to mid-sized players, they have to play catch up in that arena.
Related to the technology, and Joe, sorry, before you add to that, a question from the audience is, are you seeing a trend in RPO vendors developing proprietary technology or partnering with tech vendors in the industry?
There is a very clever mix, right? So we are seeing three things happening. One is definitely the focus on a partnership ecosystem, right? People want to have a preferred tech stack in place, which they can sort of quickly implement if the client asks. The second thing happening is very small number of players are actually investing in creating something proprietary. But one smart way of navigation is a lot of white labeling, right? So what essentially RPO providers are doing is taking the best of the best, right? They're taking the best CRM, they're taking the best recruitment marketing solution, they're taking the best matching tool that you can find, and they are plugging it into their ecosystem. They're creating an application layer, which is very client facing. The client only sees one application. It can be an X application, but they don't know what's happening in the background. And that is actually helping clients a lot, right? They don't have to deal with 5 different platforms. There's one point of entry, and whatever modules or whatever functionality they want, it can be switched on or it can be turned on, thanks to the partners in the background, right, with these service providers. And that's what I would say, if I can use that term, RPO providers are actually, rising or becoming orchestrators of technology stacks and technology ecosystems in this very crowded SaaS market. Kim, did you have a point?
Well, I agree totally. You want to have best-in-class technology. It's constantly changing. I'd say the vast majority are creating channel partnerships at the end of the day and integrating the best tools into the stack.
And Joe, additional points about the emerging trends as well.
Yeah, well, I'd echo what what the team is saying so far. There was a question around sort of differentiation, which I think all the data sort of supports that. I think in general, differentiation between an RPO provider sort of and an internal team is the RPO providers, that's their core business. They spend time on strategy on how to figure out what is the best technology stack to implement. I know for us, we invest a lot of money every single year to try new technologies, right? We've got separate, and we'll try it for 1 or 2 partners or 100 hires or 1,000 hires. And maybe there's 3 or 4 technologies we're trying, and one of those is the one that gets put into our tech stack for the long term. So we're focusing, and on the people side of things, we don't really, I know we're talking about technology, and I think when you think about the people side of things, a lot of it's around holding your talent acquisition consultants, recruiters, whatever the terminology is, accountable, right? We always say the only salesperson in HR are your recruiters. and hold them accountable, take away the noise if they're dealing with internal transfers and paperwork, and get your recruiters truly sourcing and creating a great experience for the candidate and for the hiring manager, and sort of take anything that's administrative and put that into a support role. And I think part of this advisory and consulting services is doing things like that, like figure out what are the pain points that your clients have, but going a layer deeper, because if you're an RPO company or a talent acquisition leader internally, you have expertise that the rest of your organization and the other functions do not. So how do you figure out how to provide the service internally if you're an internal leader within TA? And it's not always just providing a new technology. It could be that your process is broken, and that actually doesn't cost you anything except time swaying or influencing your leaders to follow a different process. So I think all of this advisory and consulting really sits internally as well. You can bring an outside folks in. I know Kim has, a lot of experience, as you all could tell, but you could also do some of that yourself because you know what, as an internal leader, what the challenge is, and then use folks like ourselves to help maybe give you some external advice to be able to move that ball forward.
Thank you. Also, let's move to our last section with the 5 minutes we have left, and then we'll take audience questions as well. Lokesh and Sashi, you can get started. My poll question is afterwards.
Okay.
Great. So, I think after all of this very heavy discussion, the idea was to sort of think or give a few calls to action, right, to all the attendees, right? What are some of the key focus areas that, everybody should be looking at in the coming days, right? We genuinely see the market recovering in the next year, not before that. I think Kim and we are aligned on the fact that it will not be before H2 of next year. So in that, when that happens, everybody has to be prepared. Everybody has to be prepared to overcome the next set of talent challenges that come, right? And these are sort of the three key things that we feel that every TA program should have to ensure that you are at least prepared to navigate all of those challenges that are on the horizon, right? And the first is integrated processes. So as we talked earlier, there's a lot of processes, there's a lot of technologies, there's a lot of solutions that organizations are leveraging, and even service providers are leveraging. And across the market, we see very few programs which have the ability to create something very coherent, right? Integration is still an issue, or integration is still a major roadblock to the effectiveness and the efficacy of a lot of these technologies and these solutions. So ensuring that your programs and your technologies, all of them are talking to each other, you are able to have an aggregated view of all of this information will be important in the coming days. And that will also ensure that your candidates and your recruiters have the absolute best experience while they are going through the process. And all of this will in turn help you maintain and grow your employer brand, right? The second is talent development, where we're talking about, going beyond just acquiring talent, right? As happened with generative AI, the landscape became very, noisy, and every few years there's some sort of digital disruption happening, right? What this means is that, roles will continue to become obsolete, but at the same time, new roles and new skill sets will keep cropping up, right? In such an environment, acquisition or hiring, point-in-time hiring can't be the only answer to your challenges of talent acquisition. What everybody in the ecosystem has to look towards is developing talent that can address that future need, right? And I think this is what Joe also alluded to earlier, right? We have to look at it in terms of skills and not just roles, right? So the design of these functions and these programs should help enterprises to close that potential, actually assess the potential skill gap, and then close it within the workforce in the coming days, right? We are hearing a lot of chatter about skill-based organizations, but execution is something that's still far off. right? Pivoting smartly from only talent acquisition to talent acquisition and development will be very, very important in the company. And the third piece, which we have talked about extensively today, is data, right? We need to ensure that all of these processes, all of these, decisions that, anybody or any leader is taking, be it a HR leader, be it a talent acquisition leader, be it, service provider, business leader, all of us have to ensure that our decisions are based on robust analytics and are leveraging as current information as possible, both from external sources as well as from what's happening within the organizations internally, right? The intent should be to create a sustainable strategy which helps creating a pipeline of skills for you in the coming days, right? And no strategy, no near-term or long-term strategy is complete without having a solid data-based backing of that. And that's all I had from my end. Lokesh, anything you want to add here, and Kim and George?
My only comment about the future is people need to be patient, and different industries, different skill sets obviously have been impacted by this recession differently. I do think it's leveling off. I do think it's a mild recession. I do think there's similarities to 2008, 2009 recession. And I think the recovery will be very similar to that. That's my take. I think we need to look at maybe out 12 to 18 months before we start to see a positive trend in growth.
Well said, Kim.
Thoughts?
Yeah, well said, Kim. I would agree with that. And the other thing I think about, if you're an internal talent acquisition leader or you're an RPO leader, it's how do you continue to serve your customers, which are your hiring managers and your organization. And even though you may be, taking a black eye to cut costs, and you're not maybe the most welcome person in the room because you're not necessarily driving top line for your organization, unless you happen to be hiring a lot of folks that are delivering, sort of sales and revenue for your organization. But you still have to be innovative. That's my view. You got to be innovative and figure out ways to make the overall talent acquisition experience more productive and more and have a better experience for your candidates and your hiring managers. And so while the overall strategy, your strategy should continue to evolve, even though you may have less dollars to do that. But keep doing that. Otherwise, if you're in the weeds and you don't have the time to take a look at your overall strategy, find a leader that can sort of co-champion any of your talent acquisition objectives. Get your CFO involved in talent acquisition, right? They're the ones driving the number one challenge, which is costs. We'll get them to understand some of the data and some of the processes and some of the value and some of the challenges your own recruiters have that may allow them to support you in a different way. That's been our experience, especially over the last 12 months when we've seen that cost pressure.
Thank you. We are out of time. I do want to launch our last poll and ask the audience this question. How do you feel about the future of RPO after today's discussion? Are you feeling more optimistic, not, or same as before?
Yeah, at least we didn't scare anyone off.
Exactly.
Lamees, I started my first RPO business in the 2002 recession. People said, "What are you doing?" It was the best time to start an RPO business.
And that is optimistic. Let's see what the audience is saying. So luckily, it's been a positive discussion and people are feeling more excited about the opportunities for RPO or same as before. I also want to share this with the panelists before we get on the call. We had a quick poll to what the actual attendance would be out of 120 signed up. The expectation was between 25 and 42, and the actual number, I saw 51 people on the call at one point. So the reality might be better than what we expect. Hopefully, we'll have a good turnaround. And I do want to thank all of our panelists today: Kim Davis, Joe Marino, Salesh Huda, and Lukesh Goyal. Excellent discussion. Thank you so much for your insights. And our participants, thank you for your active participation. We'll stay on the call if you have any questions. But I do want to close today's webinar for the sake of time. Thank you so much. Join us for an upcoming webinar. We have great topics coming up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
If you need to leave Joe, Kim, and the Everest Group, please go ahead. There is a question from the audience that we did not get to answer, and that is around, is there a good summary of what an RPO tech stack should look like out there? Is anyone aware of what RPO tech stack looks like?
Yeah, we can actually spend another 1 hour discussing that for sure.
That's right.
Yeah.
I feel
Go
ahead.
Sorry, Flores.
I don't know if your assessment is similar, but I feel that bigger RPOs have internal resources that help them figure out what an RPO tech stack looks like. The smaller, not as much. And as an association, we figure that's an area where we can support the industry. So we are working on resources. The iCoco marketplace, for participants who are not aware of that resource, is something we are building to provide resources to support the technologies. Sash, you want to add something else?
Yeah, I mean, without getting into the specifics, right? If you want to look at what a RPO perfect tech stack should look like, it is, are you able to source, attract, and engage candidates, right? That's is your tech stack able to do that? Mm-hmm. So, and that's where, that entire category of candidate relationship management tools such as Phenom, Avature, Eightfold, etc., have actually, made great headways in the last few years, right? So if your tech stack is able to answer these or address these 3 key concerns, you are off to a good start. But a perfect tech stack actually can have each and everything that we have discussed today, and even more things, right? So the entire page that we showed, which had table stakes as well as the differentiating capabilities, I think at the end of the day, a few years down the line, a perfect tech stack should have all of that, right? Advanced analytics, platform capabilities combined with the necessary point solutions and automation and RPA capabilities wherever.
And I'm more than happy to share the summary of our tech stack with the individual Lemise.
Okay, so
and Lemise, we had kind of addressed that in our workshop.
Thank you for reminding me. You have a really good summary.
I responded to that in the chat box that we have a workshop that provides great info in terms of what that ought to look like and some of the tools that ought to be used.
That's correct.